She's still wearing the ring? Vanessa Hale said it softly, but not softly enough. The sentence slipped across the marble floor of the Whitmore Capitol Gala like a drop of red wine on white silk. At the far end of the room, Claire Whitmore had just stepped out of the private elevator on the 60th floor, alone, dressed in a cream-colored gown that did not ask for attention and somehow took it anyway. Behind her, Manhattan glittered through glass walls, all steel, light, and impossible height. Below, yellow cabs moved like sparks along the avenues. Above, crystal chandeliers caught every camera flash and broke it into pieces. This was Ethan Whitmore's night, or at least that was what every invitation had promised. The launch of Whitmore Capital's new investment empire. A black-tie celebration for the Man Business magazines had started calling the architect of modern wealth. Claire had read that phrase 3 times in the car on the way there, her thumb resting over the missing part of the story. Architect. As if she had not drawn the first lines with him at a kitchen table in Queens, back when their office was a rented room above a dentist's clinic and their coffee came from a gas station 2 blocks away. Across the room, Ethan stood beneath the company logo in a charcoal tuxedo, smiling for donors, bankers, and men who measured friendship in stock options. Vanessa stood beside him in a silver dress, one hand curled lightly around his arm, not as a guest, not as an employee, but as someone rehearsing ownership. She saw Claire before Ethan did. Her smile sharpened. The laughter around her lowered into that cruel little silence wealthy rooms know how to create when they sense entertainment arriving. That's almost brave, Vanessa added, lifting her champagne glass. A few people chuckled. Someone looked away too late. Claire stopped beside a tower of white roses, close enough to hear, far enough to pretend she had not. Her wedding ring caught the chandelier light, a small circle of gold on a hand that did not tremble. Ethan finally turned. For 1 second, something like surprise moved across his face. Then calculation covered it. He did not step toward her. He did not remove Vanessa's hand from his sleeve. He did not say, "This is my wife." He only gave Claire the polite smile he usually reserved for investors he intended to disappoint later. That was the moment the room understood permission. Vanessa glided forward, her perfume arriving before her, sweet and expensive. "Claire," she said, as if greeting a woman from an old neighborhood charity luncheon, "I wasn't sure you'd come." Claire looked at her, then past her, to the massive screen where Ethan's name hovered above the words "built from nothing." The phrase sat there, glowing, clean, and false. "I was invited," Claire said. Her voice was calm enough to make Vanessa blink. Ethan's jaw tightened, just slightly. Around them, glasses paused halfway to painted lips. Cameras shifted, hungry without appearing rude. Vanessa leaned closer, still smiling. "By tomorrow, there won't be much place for the past in this company." Claire let the silence hold. She did not defend herself. She did not look at Ethan for rescue. She simply touched the ring once, like checking the time, and answered, "There already is." Then she walked deeper into the room, and for the first time that night, Ethan Whitmore stopped smiling. Claire had learned long ago that a woman could be erased without anyone raising their voice. It happened slowly, politely, behind glass doors and glossy magazine covers. At first, Ethan had called her brilliant. Back in Queens, before the tailored suits and private elevators, he used to sit across from her at a scratched kitchen table with takeout containers between them, watching her turn impossible numbers into plans that made sense. Their first office was less than 400 square feet, above a dental clinic that smelled like mint and cleaning solution. In winter, the radiator knocked so loudly they had to pause their calls with clients. In summer, the air conditioner leaked into a plastic bucket beside Claire's desk. Ethan pitched dreams. Claire built the bridge beneath them. She knew which lender might take a chance, which vendor would wait 30 more days for payment, which clause could keep a bad deal from swallowing them whole. When banks said no, she found private investors. When investors hesitated, she gave them projections so clean they looked inevitable. When the company almost collapsed in its second year, Claire sold the small brick house her mother had left her in New Jersey. She remembered signing the papers on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, the real estate agent sliding documents across a conference table while Ethan squeezed her hand and promised, "One day, everyone will know what you did." But one day had a way of changing shape once money arrived. The first interview mentioned her as his wife. The second called her a supporter. The third did not mention her at all. Ethan said it was strategy. He said investors liked a single face, a clear story, a self-made man rising from nothing. You are better with the numbers, he told her, kissing her forehead in the old office as if gratitude could replace credit. Let me be the front. We both know who keeps this alive. Claire believed him because love had made her generous with silence. She learned to stand at the edge of photographs. She learned to smile while men shook Ethan's hand for decisions she had made at midnight. She learned that the world applauded a man louder when the woman beside him stepped back. Years passed. The rented office became an entire floor. The plastic bucket became imported marble. The gas station coffee became espresso served in white porcelain cups by assistants who did not know Claire had once cleaned the office bathroom herself before an investor meeting. Ethan changed with each new room. His voice grew smoother. His compliments became public and general. His apologies became private and brief. He started saying my company instead of our company, my board instead of our board, my vision instead of our plan. Claire noticed every word. She stored them the way she stored contracts, carefully, without showing anyone the file. Then Vanessa Hale appeared as a consultant with bright confidence and a gift for standing exactly where cameras pointed. She laughed at Ethan's jokes before he finished them. She praised his instincts while Claire corrected the risk models no one thanked her for reading. At first, Claire only saw ambition in Vanessa. Later, she saw permission. Ethan allowed the closeness, then protected it, then pretended Claire was unreasonable for noticing. By the night of the gala, the story had already been rewritten. Ethan was the empire. Vanessa was the future. Claire was the quiet woman in the cream gown, still wearing the ring they mistook for weakness. But as she stood beneath the glowing words on the screen, built from nothing, she thought of the house in New Jersey, the 400-square-foot office, the contracts in her private safe, and the name Ethan had never bothered to read twice. Nothing, she realized, had always belonged to her. The applause began before Ethan reached the stage, the kind of applause that did not rise from love, but from calculation. It rolled through the 60th floor ballroom in polished waves, passing over white roses, black tuxedos, diamond earrings, and champagne glasses held by people who already knew where the money was moving. Claire stood near the side wall, half hidden by the glow of the city behind her, watching Ethan accept the room as if it had always belonged to him. He adjusted the microphone, smiled that magazine smile, and spoke about vision, courage, risk, and the kind of hunger it took to build something no one believed in. Each word landed softly, wrapped in velvet, but Claire could feel the empty space inside them. He thanked the board. He thanked the investors. He thanked the city of New York for teaching him how to fight upward. He even thanked Vanessa Hale, calling her a remarkable force in the company's new chapter. The room turned toward her, and Vanessa lowered her eyes with practiced modesty, her hand resting lightly against her silver dress as if surprise had touched her. Claire did not move. No one said her name. Not once. A waiter paused beside her with a tray of champagne, and she took a glass only to have something to hold. The crystal was cold against her fingers. She remembered other cold things. The metal chair in the bank lobby when Ethan's first loan was denied. The rain on her hair the day she sold her mother's house. The office floor beneath her knees when she stayed until 2 in the morning sorting receipts because they could not afford an accountant. On stage, Ethan raised his glass. To the future, he said, and to everything we built from nothing. The room answered with a bright, obedient cheer. Then Vanessa stepped forward. It was subtle at first, just a beautiful woman accepting attention she had not earned, but the cameras loved her confidence. She took Ethan's glass from his hand and lifted it higher, turning slightly so the photographers could catch them together beneath the company logo. I think what Ethan means, she said, her voice sweet enough to pass for charm, is that some people dream about comfort and some people are brave enough to build empires. A murmur moved through the crowd. Vanessa let it breathe. Then her eyes found Claire. Some wives build homes, she continued, smiling, and some women stand beside greatness while it happens. The laughter was not loud. That made it worse. It was controlled, expensive, careful enough to deny later. Ethan looked down at his shoes for half a second, then back at the crowd. He did not correct her. Claire felt the room tilt, not because she was weak, but because the truth had been insulted in public and dressed up as a joke. She placed the untouched champagne on a nearby table. The glass made one small sound against the marble, quiet as a signature. Vanessa descended from the stage a few minutes later, glowing with victory, and stopped close enough for only Claire to hear. "By tomorrow," she whispered. "There will not be a place for you here." Claire looked at Ethan first. He was speaking to a banker now, laughing too hard, pretending not to watch. Then she looked back at Vanessa. There were many things she could have said. She could have named the house in New Jersey. She could have named the first investors. She could have named every contract Ethan had signed without reading because he trusted her love more than her memory. Instead, Claire smiled with a calm that made Vanessa's expression flicker. "There already is," she said. Not loud, not cruel, just certain. Then Claire turned away from the music, the cameras, and the man who had mistaken silence for surrender, and walked toward the private elevator with one thought. Clear in her mind. Before sunrise, someone else would be giving the toast. The elevator doors closed behind Claire with a sound so soft it felt final. For 60 floors, she stood alone beneath the pale ceiling light, watching her reflection hold still in the polished metal walls. The cream gown, the gold ring, the face Ethan had trained the world to overlook. Somewhere above her, the music kept playing. Champagne kept pouring. Vanessa kept smiling beside a man whose name glowed across a room built on someone else's sacrifice. Claire did not cry. She had cried months ago, quietly, in the back seat of a car outside a restaurant where Ethan had claimed to be meeting investors. She had cried once in the laundry room of their penthouse with a silk blouse pressed against her mouth so the housekeeper would not hear. But not tonight. Tonight, every tear had turned into memory, and every memory had become a document. When she stepped into the underground garage, the city air was sharp and cold, carrying the smell of rain on concrete. Her driver opened the door, but Claire shook her head and slid into the back seat without help. "Home?" he asked. She looked through the tinted window at the glittering tower above her. For years, she had called that building Ethan's dream. For years, she had forgotten that the foundation had her fingerprints under the marble. "No," she said. "The office on Mercer Street." The driver did not ask questions. 40 minutes later, Claire unlocked a narrow brownstone in Soho that no magazine had ever photographed. The brass plaque beside the door read Ashford Advisory Group, a name most people in Ethan's circle believed belonged to a quiet investment consultant with old money and no public face. Inside, the office smelled of paper, cedar, and coffee left cooling in a glass pot. Claire turned on one lamp, then another. Warm light spread over shelves of legal binders, framed market reports, and a charcoal drawing of her mother's house in New Jersey. She stood before the drawing for a moment. Then she reached behind the frame and pressed a hidden latch. The wall safe opened with a small metallic breath. Inside were the things Ethan had forgotten, because forgetting had always been his privilege. The original seed investment agreement, the emergency voting rights addendum, the morality and fiduciary breach clause tied to executive conduct during a control event, the convertible debt instruments Ashford had quietly purchased from nervous lenders over the past 3 years. Each folder had a white label. Each label had a date. Each date was a night Claire had chosen patience over panic. She removed the oldest file first. The paper was thick, cream-colored, and almost innocent in the lamplight. Ethan's signature sat at the bottom, bold and careless, the signature of a man who had once trusted his wife to protect him from his own arrogance. Claire remembered that day clearly. They had been sitting in the 400-square-foot office above the dental clinic, eating cold pizza from a paper plate. Ethan had signed page after page while taking a call, waving his pen at her as if paperwork was the boring part of destiny. "You handle the details," he had said. "I trust you." Claire ran one finger beneath the clause he had never read twice. Trust, she had learned, was not the same as respect. At 12:37 in the morning, she placed the file on her desk, took off her wedding ring, and set it beside her phone. Then she dialed Julian Mercer. Julian Mercer answered on the second ring, as if he had been waiting for the call longer than Claire had been willing to make it. His voice came through calm, low, and clear, with the steady patience of a man who had spent his life watching powerful people discover that paper could be louder than pride. "Claire," he said, not Mrs. Whitmore, not as a courtesy, but as a reminder that she had a name before Ethan turned it into furniture beside his. She looked at the folders spread across the desk, each one carrying a piece of a life Ethan had mistaken for invisible labor. "It is time," she said. There was no dramatic pause, no gasp of surprise. Only the faint sound of a chair moving on the other end. Then Julian replied, "I will be there in 20 minutes." Outside, Mercer Street shone black under the rain. The city had gone quiet in the way New York only does after midnight. Not asleep, just listening. Claire made coffee while she waited, the old machine sputtering in the small office kitchen, filling the room with a bitter warmth that reminded her of beginnings. When Julian arrived, his overcoat was dotted with rain, his silver hair neatly combed, his leather briefcase held at his side like a sealed verdict. He did not ask if she was sure. He had known Claire for 12 years, long enough to understand that she only moved when the ground beneath her was already measured. He removed his glasses, looked at the open safe, then at the ring beside her phone. Did he let her speak publicly, he asked. Claire slid the gala program across the desk. Ethan's name was printed in gold. Vanessa's name had been added to the donor list in the last week. Claire's was nowhere on the page. Julian read it once, and something in his expression cooled. Then we proceed cleanly. He opened his briefcase and removed a black binder stamped with the Ashford Advisory Group seal. To the world, Ashford was a discreet investment firm, a quiet buyer of troubled debt, a patient shadow behind distressed assets. To Ethan, it had been a useful outside partner that helped stabilize Whitmore Capital during uncertain quarters. He had even praised Ashford in a board meeting once, calling it proof that serious money still believed in him. Claire remembered sitting 3 chairs away from him, hands folded, saying nothing. Ethan had never asked who owned Ashford. He had never cared. Men like Ethan often mistook secrecy for emptiness. Julian turned the binder toward her. At the top of the first page was the full legal name of the controlling member, Claire Ashford Whitmore. Ashford was her mother's maiden name, the name on the deed of the house Claire had sold, the name Ethan had seen on old Christmas cards and never bothered to remember. Slowly, Julian laid out the map. Ashford had purchased Whitmore Capital's convertible debt from 2 nervous lenders in Connecticut. Ashford held preferred shares tied to the emergency voting rights addendum. Ashford had the right to trigger board review if executive conduct created reputational or fiduciary risk during a major control event. And Ethan, years ago, had signed every clause while calling them details. Claire listened without blinking. The rain tapped softly against the tall windows. Somewhere uptown, Ethan was likely still being congratulated for a future that had already slipped out of his hands. Julian placed a pen beside the documents. Once you sign, the board receives notice before dawn. Claire looked at the ring one last time, then at her mother's name printed in black ink. "Not revenge," she said quietly. Julian nodded. "Control." By 1:18 in the morning, the small office on Mercer Street had become quieter than a church after the last candle went out. Claire sat at the walnut desk with the Ashford binder open before her, the city reflected in the dark window behind Julian Mercer's shoulder. Outside, rain slid down the glass in clean silver lines. Inside, the only sounds were the low hum of the printer, the turn of legal pages, and the soft click of Julian's pen as he marked each signature tab with a practiced hand. Claire signed where he pointed. Not quickly, not emotionally. Each signature was steady, measured, and complete, as if she was not destroying a lie but restoring the truth to its proper place. At 1:46, Julian sent the first notice to the independent directors of Whitmore Capital. At 2:03, a secured message went to the lead lender in Stamford. At 2:21, Ashford Advisory Group formally triggered its rights under the convertible debt agreements. At 2:40, the board secretary acknowledged receipt with a single sentence that made Julian look up over his glasses. Emergency review will convene at 8 o'clock in the morning. Claire did not smile. She only reached for her coffee, now cold, and drank it anyway. Uptown, Ethan was still awake in a private hotel lounge 2 blocks from the gala venue, accepting compliments from men who believed proximity to him was still valuable. Vanessa sat beside him, her silver dress changed for a white blazer draped over her shoulders, her phone glowing with photos from the party. She had already chosen one where Ethan stood beside her under the company logo, his hand near her waist, the future arranged neatly in the frame. She typed a caption, paused, then laughed softly. "They loved us tonight," she said. Ethan glanced at the screen, pleased but distracted. "Tomorrow is what matters." He said it like a king discussing a coronation. He did not know that across town, His name was moving from authority to subject line. At 3:17, Julian placed the final document before Claire. It was not the longest file. It was not the most complicated, but it carried the sharpest weight. A formal request to suspend Ethan Whitmore's executive voting privileges pending board review of fiduciary conduct, reputational exposure, and control obligations during a major financing event. Claire read every word. She remembered Ethan on stage, thanking everyone except the woman who had kept his dream alive. She remembered Vanessa's whisper, sweet as poison wrapped in silk. She remembered her mother's house, the rainy Tuesday, the signature Ethan had given without respect because he thought love made her harmless. Her hand hovered over the page for one breath, then the pen touched paper. At 4:12, the last email left Julian's encrypted account. The printer stopped. The office settled. Somewhere beyond the windows, the first blue edge of morning began pressing against the city. Claire stood and walked to the drawing of the New Jersey house, its charcoal roof shaded beneath trees that no longer belonged to her. Julian gathered the documents into his briefcase, then paused beside the desk where her wedding ring rested in the circle of lamplight. "Do you want it back?" he asked quietly. Claire looked at the ring, then at the skyline turning pale over lower Manhattan. "Not yet," she said. "Let him see the empty hand first." At 7:52 in the morning, the conference room on the 60th floor looked untouched by the night before. The roses had been removed from the ballroom, the champagne glasses cleared, the music silenced, but the building still carried the faint smell of expensive flowers and polished marble, as if celebration could leave a shadow. Ethan Whitmore stepped out of the private elevator in a navy suit, freshly shaved, his smile already prepared for applause. Vanessa Hale walked beside him in a red dress and a cream coat draped over her shoulders, holding her phone like it was a mirror the world had finally agreed to look into. She had posted 3 photos before breakfast. In each one, she stood close enough to Ethan to suggest a future without having to explain the past. "Big morning," she said, smoothing one hand over her sleeve. Ethan glanced at the frosted glass doors ahead, where the board members were already seated. "After this, everything changes." He meant it as victory. The doors opened before he touched them. Inside, the long black table stretched beneath a row of hanging lights, every chair filled except 2 at the far end. The chief financial officer sat with his hands folded too tightly. The board secretary avoided Ethan's eyes. 2 independent directors whispered over a printed packet, their faces gray with the exhaustion of people who had been reading bad news since dawn. At the head of the table, the chairman, Richard Bell, did not stand to greet him. Ethan slowed, just enough for Vanessa to notice. "Good morning," Ethan said, forcing brightness into his voice. No one answered quickly. Vanessa moved toward the chair to Ethan's right, the one she had imagined herself occupying in every photograph after the announcement. Before she could sit, the board secretary looked up with a professional smile that carried no warmth. "I am sorry, Ms. Hale. That seat is reserved." The room went still. Vanessa's hand froze on the back of the chair. Ethan turned sharply. "Reserved for whom?" The answer came from behind him, not loud, not rushed, but perfectly clear. "For me." Claire Whitmore stood in the doorway in a white tailored suit, her hair pinned neatly at the nape of her neck, her face calm in the morning light. She wore no necklace, no dramatic jewelry, no symbol of apology or defeat. Her left hand was bare. Ethan saw it at once. The absence struck harder than any accusation. Behind her, Julian Mercer entered with a leather briefcase in one hand and a black binder in the other. He nodded once to the chairman, then placed the binder on the table with a sound that made everyone look down. Vanessa stared at Claire as if the room had broken some private rule. "What is this?" she asked, but no one answered her. Claire walked to the reserved chair and sat without asking permission. She did not look at Ethan first. She looked at the board, the people who had shaken his hand for years while ignoring the woman who had kept the numbers alive. Then she placed a small black velvet box beside her folder. The lid was closed. Ethan's face tightened. "Claire," he said, lowering his voice as if intimacy could still control the room. "This is not the place." Claire finally turned to him. Her expression was almost gentle. "That is what you thought last night." Richard Bell cleared his throat. The sound moved through the room like a gavel. "Mr. Whitmore, Ms. Hale, please take the remaining seats. This emergency review has already begun." Ethan did not sit. For the first time in years, the room that carried his name waited for someone else. Julian Mercer opened the black binder, and the room seemed to lose 1 degree of warmth. Ethan remained standing near the foot of the table, one hand pressed to the back of a chair he had not taken, his eyes moving from Julian to Claire, and then to the board members who would not meet his stare. Vanessa sat slowly in the remaining chair, her red dress bright against the gray morning, her confidence thinning with every second no one explained things in her favor. Richard Bell folded his hands. "Mr. Mercer, please proceed." Julian rose with the quiet authority of a man who did not need volume to be heard. As of 4:12 this morning, Ashford Advisory Group formally exercised its rights under the convertible debt agreements, preferred share protections, and emergency voting provisions attached to Whitmore Capital. Ethan gave a short laugh, but it came out dry. Ashford is a lender, a partner. They do not control anything. Julian turned one page. Ashford is the majority holder of convertible debt now activated under a breach review. Ashford also holds the preferred voting instruments attached to the first private rescue financing, dated 12 years ago. The chief financial officer looked down. He already knew. That was the part Ethan saw next, and it unsettled him more than the words themselves. His own finance chief had not been. Surprised, Vanessa leaned toward Ethan, whispering, "What is he talking about?" Ethan did not answer. He was staring at the document Julian had placed on the screen at the end of the room. There it was, enlarged for every director to see. The first rescue agreement. The one signed in a cramped office above a dental clinic. The one Ethan had dismissed as paperwork while Claire kept the company alive with money from a house she never got back. At the bottom of the page, his signature sat in bold black ink. Beside it was hers. Not Claire Whitmore. Claire Ashford Whitmore. Vanessa read the name and blinked. "Ashford," she said softly, as if the word had changed shape in her mouth. Claire did not look at her. Julian continued. "The controlling member of Ashford Advisory Group is Claire Ashford Whitmore. Through Ashford, she holds the activated voting majority for this emergency review and the authority to recommend executive suspension pending formal investigation." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of every year Claire had been left out of speeches, every photograph cropped around her, every room where men praised Ethan for numbers she had saved before dawn. Ethan finally found his voice. "This is absurd. Claire, tell them this is a misunderstanding." She looked at him then, her bare left hand resting beside the closed black velvet box. "It is not." His face shifted, not into guilt, not yet, but into the stunned anger of a man discovering that the ground beneath him had a deed. "You hid this from me." Claire's expression stayed calm. "No, Ethan. You signed it. You just never respected the person who understood it." A director near the window closed his folder. The sound was small, but Vanessa flinched. She turned to Ethan, searching his face for the version of him she had celebrated the night before, the man who had promised her access, status, and a seat close to power. All she found was panic carefully dressed in a navy suit. Richard Bell adjusted his glasses and read from the resolution in front of him. Pending board vote, Ethan Whitmore will be suspended from executive voting authority. Claire Ashford Whitmore will assume controlling chair. Responsibilities during the review period. Vanessa pushed back her chair slightly. "You cannot just walk in here and take his company." Claire finally looked at her. Not with cruelty, not with triumph, with something quieter and far more permanent. "I did not take it," she said. "I kept the receipts." Julian passed the resolution down the table. One by one, the directors reached for their pens. Ethan watched the ink move across the pages, each signature cutting him further away from the empire he had claimed was built from nothing. Claire sat still while morning light spread across the table and touched her name on the screen. Underneath every polished lie, it had been there all along. The final signature came from Richard Bell at 8:37 in the morning. His pen moved across the resolution with a careful scratch, then stopped, leaving a silence so complete Claire could hear the soft rush of air through the vents above the conference table. No one applauded. No one needed to. The vote had passed, the authority had shifted, and the room that had spent years orbiting Ethan Whitmore now turned quietly toward his wife. Ethan stood very still, as if movement might make the truth more real. Vanessa looked from face to face, waiting for someone to object, someone to laugh, Someone to remind Claire that women like her were supposed to leave rooms with dignity, not inherit them. But the directors only closed their folders. The chief financial officer removed Ethan's nameplate from the presentation screen and replaced it with a temporary governance notice. Then, in clean black letters, Claire's full name appeared above the words controlling chairwoman. Ethan stared at it as though the letters belonged to a stranger. Claire rose from her chair. She did not hurry. She collected the signed resolution, placed it in front of Julian Mercer, and reached for the small black velvet box beside her folder. For the first time all morning, Ethan looked afraid of something smaller than a contract. "Claire," he said, his voice lowered into the tone he used when he wanted a private mistake to remain private. "We should talk." She held the box in her palm and studied him for one quiet second. He looked polished, expensive, and suddenly young in the worst way, like a boy standing beside a broken vase and hoping no one would remember who touched it. "You had 12 years to talk," she said. "Last night, you chose an audience." Vanessa pushed back her chair. "This is humiliating," she said, but the word sounded different now that it had changed owners. Claire turned to her, calm as morning glass. "No," she said. "Humiliation is being laughed at in a room you helped build." Vanessa opened her mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing in Claire's voice to fight. No rage, no performance, no doorway for another insult. Only a boundary, placed neatly in the center of the table. Ethan stepped closer, lowering his eyes to Claire's bare left hand. "The ring," he said, almost whispering. Claire opened the velvet box. Inside, the gold band rested on black satin, shining with a history that no longer had power over her. She set it on the table in front of him, not thrown, not offered, simply returned. "I wore it because I believed in what we built," she said. "I took it off when I understood you believed it was yours alone." Outside the glass walls, Manhattan moved on, yellow cabs slipping between towers, coffee carts steaming on the corners, the city beginning another ordinary day while one man lost the myth he had sold to everyone, including himself. Julian gathered the documents. The board members stood one by one. Vanessa left first, her heels clicking too loudly down the hallway. Ethan remained beside the table, staring at the ring as if it might explain what he had missed. Claire walked to the door, then paused beneath the company logo. She did not look back for long. "You celebrated an empire last night," she said softly. "This morning, I corrected the paperwork." Then she stepped into the hall, past the assistants, past the cameras waiting behind the glass, past the version of herself that had once waited to be thanked. She did not win him back. She won herself.